How's it going, everyone? I am Russell Clay here to talk to you about some salary exploitation for Week 10. It's a pretty interesting week. Obviously, Week 8 and 9, the bye week pain is essentially over. So I guess just starting off with quarterback here. I highlighted Trevor Siemian and Philip Rivers. I really like Philip Rivers at 6,700. I think he's a good value against Miami. Obviously, Melvin Gordon and the running game getting going, which is a good thing for Rivers. Hasn't had that in quite a few years. Obviously, has Gordon to dump it off to as well. Hunter Henry should play. I think that's a nice thing for Rivers. While it might not mean Hunter Henry goes off. Hunter Henry's a good blocker. He's got Gates there. He's got Terrell Williams, Dontrell Inman. These are not superstars, but Rivers can certainly make it happen with them. Hasn't been throwing a ton of touchdowns of late. Has kind of been getting a lot of his production stolen by Melvin Gordon. But I think Miami is kind of a mini funnel in terms of funneling passing yardage that way. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there. As far as Trevor Siemian goes, I mean, I know he's not a great option, but he could get you 20 fantasy points against the Saints defense. Obviously, the low completion percentage against the Raiders, but he did have 283 and 2 touchdowns. He has Demaryius Thomas. He has Emmanuel Sanders there. Some nice options for him to throw to. Obviously, Saints are a liability defensively, so something to look at there. Now looking at Colin Kaepernick this week, obviously had a big game against the Saints, who we were just talking about. Not going to have the same luck against the Cardinals. As far as other guys I'm looking at, I mean, Russell Wilson certainly viable. Dak Prescott certainly viable. Ben Roethlisberger not healthy, not someone I want to trust. And then you just kind of go up the line. I think I want to go with Rodgers here. Tough defenses, and then not too tough with the Titans, especially with what the Chargers did to him last week. So certainly viable there. As far as running back goes, I like Melvin Gordon again. I mean, why would the train end? Just beat up a really good Tennessee run defense. Obviously has 4 receptions, and at least 4 receptions in each of the last 3 weeks. Every game over 22 fantasy points. I mean, this guy's just been crushing all season, and he's finally getting, his legs under him as the season goes along. Former first-round pick. Compared to Matt Forte from a physical profile, at least on playerprofiler.com. So I think that's viable. The touchdowns are going to come. I like stacking him with Rivers and cash games. I think that's a high upside combination. As far as, him in general, though, I think we're being shown, volume matters. And he's going to get 25 touches a game. So as long as he's, not the top priced guy, I think we have to look at him. David Johnson, of course, 8,400 against San Fran. San Fran just hemorrhaging rushing yards on seemingly every play. So that's obviously viable. The guy I looked at, though, is really interesting to me. Darren Sproles finally admitted, the coach finally admitted that Sproles was the starter. Getting 15 to 20 touches a game now over the last 2. Certainly going to be getting that again. He is one big play away from really, pushing those fantasy scores from 10 to 15 to 25-30. He's going to have one of those games soon. Atlanta seems like a very viable target for that to happen. So I like him quite a bit. I think he's certainly viable. As far as Tim Hightower and Mark Ingram, I mean, obviously last week paid off, but I'm not necessarily in on on either this week. It's San Francisco, but you look at the previous few weeks for Ingram, getting pretty ugly out there. 2 straight games with a fumble lost. I'm just not all that in on Ingram and the Saints right now. So, not touching Charkandrick West. Todd Gurley 5,300, man. I don't even know what to say. He's just, they're not giving him the touches, number one, but it just hasn't been working this year, It's just weird. I don't remember seeing something like this before with such a good player. So, weird stuff, but what are you going to do? Guys I highlighted here, Devontae Adams at only 6,300. I mean, he's been, a top 5 guy over the last 3 weeks. Obviously, leaning on that week 7 performance, but he hasn't been chopped liver the last 2 weeks either. That 12 reception game and then 4 for 40 with a touchdown here. So he's been hitting value every week. Even with Cobb coming back and Montgomery coming back, I still expect him to be one of the main guys in the offense, especially with, opposite Jordy. He's the intermediate guy now. That's not changing. So I like him quite a bit. I'm okay with J.J. Nelson. He's fine. Against the 49ers. I think he's an interesting, deep threat. Obviously not as cheap as he was before. 42 is a little expensive for him, but whatever. A guy I was going to highlight is Cordero Patterson. So new offensive coordinator. 8 targets for Patterson, the most he's had on the season. I don't think this is surprising at all. The run game isn't working. They need Patterson to, really be a pseudo run game right now. In these passes, he's the guy that's going to get things moving. And I mean, he was pretty good. He dropped a touchdown. That was tough. That would have brought his day to 20 points instead of the 10. But I think it's important to note that he's been a part of the offense. 6 or more targets in 4 of the last 5 weeks. So. I think it's important to pay attention to that type of stuff. And Patterson at only 3,400 against this Washington defense and secondary, he can certainly break a big one. So, yes, just a tournament play, but at the same time, I think it is pretty intriguing. Who did I want to key in on? I mean, I'm okay with Eli Rogers at 35. Obviously, Roethlisberger's still very hurt, but Eli Rogers coming off a 100-yard game, had that injury in the middle of the season that kind of stunted his growth a little bit, but overall, I mean, I like it. The rest of this is tough. Cameron Meredith is someone I thought about for a little while. But other than that, I mean, this guy's pretty intriguing. Michael Thomas hasn't had below 12 DK points since week 2. He's just a huge part of a Drew Brees-led offense. They're at home. I know it's the Broncos, but something to think about at the very least, in my opinion. Stephon Diggs going to be a target hog. Obviously, Josh Norman there, but 13 and 14 targets last 2 weeks. Really, all they have in the passing game. Certainly viable there. Last guy highlighted in the article, Demaryius Thomas. 10 targets, at least 10 targets in 4 straight games. Obviously hasn't, really come through on that, but as far as, the price goes for the Saints, I think that kind of matches up well for his upside. As we know with Demaryius, a few big plays and these mediocre games turn into weak winners. So at 6,700, I think he's a viable move in tournaments and even cash games. So that's pretty straightforward there. Gronk is back in the main slate. Same with Jordan Reed. We finally have some good tight ends again. Jimmy Graham, obviously viable. But, if we're looking for some value here, Lance Kendricks is okay. At 3K, I'm fine with that. I certainly like his chances against the Jets. 21 targets in the last 2 weeks. Obviously had the receiving touchdown in week 6. His role is steadily growing as they're realizing Case Keenum just can't throw the ball deep. And teams are forcing him to dink and dunk and eventually make mistakes that he does. But Lance Kendricks is a beneficiary of that from a fantasy sense. So while the yards per catch aren't going to be there, he's certainly a reliable target, as you can see. In a Case Keenum-led offense, about as efficient as you're going to get. So I do like him. I think he's pretty viable. As far as, going down here, not much here. But, if you kind of look up a little bit, go to 3,700. Zach Ertz, season-long owners breathe a sigh of relief. Caught all 8 of his targets for 97 yards. Had a 30-yard reception. We just hadn't seen, a lot of that from him so far this year. It really just been dump-offs. So you'd have to be interested to see if he becomes this prominent guy that we expected when they signed him to that contract extension. At only 3,700, if you're getting 15 to 17 points from him, maybe a touchdown, I think he's certainly viable, especially against this Atlanta secondary. I looked at the Rams, obviously I'm biased. I'm a Rams fan, if you don't know that. They haven't really had a ton of upside since week 4. They've really been on a downhill slide with a lot of these matchups. You kind of look at it, Carolina, New York, and the Lions. Not easy matchups, but you figure they should have broken through in one of them. Against this Jets team, with what's going on at the quarterback position, though, I certainly think they're viable. So that's something I'm looking at, and something that should definitely be, viable going forward into this game. I just think, if Bryce Petty's in there, if Ryan Fitzpatrick's in there, it doesn't really matter what quarterback's in there. They're all equally a liability in terms of turnovers and sacks. So Rams, fire away. I like it quite a bit. As far as the other defense I chose, though, I've kind of been doing this the last 2 weeks with defenses, but paying up hasn't paid off. But I think the Cardinals are very interesting against San Fran. Colin Kaepernick coming off almost 400 passing yards. But as we saw with Derek Carr headed into that Broncos game, just because someone puts up 400 yards doesn't mean that they're going to do that the next week. You sort of look at this matchup as opposed to the one last week for San Francisco against the Saints. Much different story. Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, and some pretty good pass rush over there on the Cardinals side of the ball. So I expect Kaepernick to make a few mistakes. And certainly something that I'm interested in going forward. So Cardinals and cash for me, and I think they're a value at 3,700. If you like what I'm doing here, give us a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. As always, if you want to read this article, head over to dailyfantasycafe.com and check it out there. As always, thanks for tuning in, and good luck this week.